But folks, it ought to be handled. It ought to be handled. Definite application. And that's one reason why these letters are so very important. All right, every one of these contains definite application to life. Then the third common denominator is that everyone was written to Christians. Everyone was written to Christians. Now, in the epistles, there's a twofold application of that idea, Christian. One is possessing Christians. We use that expression of those who are genuinely saved, genuinely born again. We call them possessing Christians. The other is the expression professing Christians. Those who profess to be saved but don't show any evidences of it in their life. Now, the bulk of the epistles was written to possessing Christians. They're the main ones that the writers have in mind. Those who are really born again, possessing Christians. But all the way through, you'll see that Paul and these other New Testament writers had the same difficulty that we have today. That they're unsaved people in practically any congregation. Just, you say, would you like to estimate? You see, there's a wrong way you can estimate this, but I think there's a right way you can do it. I just asked a fundamental preacher one time, would you estimate approximately what percentage of your congregation is saved? And he thought for a minute, and he'd say, I'd say 50% of them maybe. See? And that was what you call a fine church. Well, Charles G. Finney, the evangelist, used to say that the church swarms with unregenerate church members. There's no doubt about that. And one reason it does is that we don't preach as Paul preached to the churches. Definite in application. And you say, oh, that person's here and he won't come back again. You're not here to build up your congregation. You're here to build up the body of Christ. And just bring people in who are not saved. See, I was brought up in a Presbyterian background. And I've told some of you that one of the teachers of our men's brotherhood class was an admitted infidel. An admitted infidel, but they had him teaching the men's Bible class. Well, you Baptists say, no, we wouldn't do that. I'm not sure about that. Particularly if you have somebody in your church who has a good fat pocketbook and you handle him pretty much with gloves on. Because if he leaves, a good deal of money leaves the church. Let it leave. God doesn't need his money. If he's not born again, God needs these very high standards. I used to ask myself this question. Did the New Testament churches have as many unsaved people in them as we do today? And my answer was no, proportionally not, because there was so much persecution. And when people are persecuted, persecution purifies the body of Christ. It drives out those who don't really know the Lord, not willing to suffer for him. But I want you to realize that New Testament churches had a lot of persecution, but they had some other things that would draw people in that we don't have. I've listed them here. One was that persecution was not equally severe at all times. There were lapses in persecution. The church would be persecuted for a while, and then there'd be a lapse, 10, 20 years. And then in different parts of the country, people weren't persecuted the same way. Persecution was not equal all the way through. That's one reason. And then a second reason is that there were special miracles. And those special miracles would draw unsaved people in. For example, you read in Acts, tremendous miracle through Peter's shadow. Somebody was healed through walking through Peter's shadow. Just get out in the sunlight, and the apostle walks along, and you get in his shadow, and you're healed. Well, you know, that'd be an incentive to join the church. After all, if I get sick, I'll just walk through the preacher's shadow. If I walk through his shadow, I'll be healed. You see, that in itself was a great miracle of God, and it was used of the Lord. But Satan can use things that are used of God. Don't you forget it. And one would be this, a special appeal of the miracles. And then another thing is special provisions were made for Christians. Special provisions were made for Christians. Have you ever heard people from China use the expression rice Christians? Rice Christians. You know, in China, they eat rice a great deal of the time. And rice Christians are those who join the church so they get rice. In other words, so they can have their financial needs taken care of. And that, of course, is one thing that everybody has to keep in mind when he gives to people in general. I'm faced with that constantly. And if any of you have any light from Scripture you think I especially need on that, let me know. But I think if you let me know that you'll still come up and get the green when I give it to you, because I want you to come. But I realize there's a danger in anything good, and just you say, well, how are you going to do it? The main thing is my prayer. See, God doesn't make any mistakes. I can make mistakes in the way I give and all, and you can second guess anybody on that. God doesn't make any mistakes. And you can just ask him, Lord, use the good and overrule anything that isn't good for thy glory. But that's always one danger, that people come to church in order to get the rights, in order to get the financial things. And that was true in New Testament times even more than now. You see, one reason is that when Christians then were lined up with the Lord, they lost their jobs. People said, not going to hire anybody who claims to be a Christian. Anybody who claims to be a Christian, you see, so they just needed what people would give them. They wouldn't live without it, because they couldn't get any jobs. That's true often in Muslim lands today. In Muslim lands today, they won't give a person a job if he claims to be a Christian. All right, those are the common denominators of these 21 letters of the New Testament. Every one is Christ-centered. Every one contains definite application to life. And every one was written to Christians. Possessing Christians, but also including professing Christians. I think that's true especially of a book like Hebrews. You say, well, now, were those folks who fell away, were they really saved? Well, I'm not trying to interpret that whole thing, but just to give you this principle. Possessing Christians and professing Christians are in the mind as you go through these letters of the New Testament. Let's come to the bottom of page 5, and we'll take page 4 at the beginning of the next period. I gave you a note before that we're omitting the 7th principle at the top of page 5. Then our 8th principle lays stress upon the progressive relationship which exists between the 3 kinds of letters which Paul wrote. Paul's 9 church epistles written to churches, Paul's 3 pastoral epistles, and Paul's personal epistle. Write in the margin, please, the word responsible. You're responsible for that threefold grouping. And then let's answer the question up at the top of page 6. What indications of providential design do you find in the fact that in the canon of Scripture, Paul's 9 church letters come first, followed by his 3 pastoral epistles, and then by Philemon, his personal epistle? The 9 church letters give the complete message of redemption. You begin with Romans, and Romans is a summary of the whole thing. But then the 8 letters that follow, written to the churches, go into detail concerning various things. And the 9 church letters give the complete message. For instance, you come to 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Nearly all agree that 1st and 2nd Thessalonians were the first in chronological order of all Paul's letters to be written. They were first in chronological order, but they're the last of the church epistles in our Bibles. The Holy Spirit guided that. He presided over it. And First and Second Thessalonians come where they ought to come, because that's the climax of the message, the complete message of redemption. Then after you have the complete message of redemption in these church letters of Paul, you have the three pastoral epistles, and I like to call them the messengers of redemption. You see, you have the complete message given, and then you have the messengers. I think that's one of the great dangers of a seminary. The Bible Institute movement tried to correct that, and the Bible College movement has tried to correct it. But the Bible Institute movement and the Bible College movement are more and more going back into the snare of the seminaries. And the snare of the seminaries was, we're here to train the messengers of redemption. We're here to ground them in the message of redemption. See, that's what you have first, the complete message. In Romans to 2 Thessalonians, complete message. And then you have the messengers. And how are you going to spread that message? But don't start off with that. And you know, often we say, well, we've given them some Bible courses at the beginning of their training, and now we'll give them more in this field of how to present it. How to present it. And people think that one of the great weaknesses of some Bible schools has been that they don't teach them how to present it. I tell you folks, one of the best ways to teach people how to present the message is to get the message into their hearts. And if you really get it into their hearts, it's going to come out in some way. I'm not against some of these how-to courses, but I think the average Bible school, Bible college, seminary has too many how-to courses. How-to. How you going to do it? The answer is, be sure you get that in your heart. Let it grip your soul. And D.L. Moody improved his method as he went on, but that dear man of God had the message burning in his heart. Burning in his heart. And then you come to the proclaimers of the message in the pastoral epistles. Now, you have your one personal letter, Philemon, that comes afterwards. And many people just class this with the Paul's prison epistles. You say you'll have a course on the prison epistles. Ephesians, written from jail. Philippians, written from jail. Colossians, written from jail. And Philemon, written from jail. But you see, that isn't the order in which we have it in the New Testament. And so if I'm asked to decide what the course is going to be, I don't include Philemon along with Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians. I take it as the last of Paul's letters. Why? Because it gives the results of the message. As the messengers go with the message, here are the results. And just in one little chapter, the Holy Spirit tells you the mighty things you can expect. Today, you know, people often say, well, the world is so corrupt, nothing can change anything but the second coming of Christ. Remember, folks, second coming of Christ is not my hope. My hope is the Christ of the second coming. And he's here now. He's here now. And where there's one danger of expecting too much in the wrong way, you know, just expect everybody to change overnight. No blood, sweat, and tears in your ministry. No, there'll be blood, sweat, and tears in your ministry. You expect that, but many of us just go to the other extreme, and we really don't expect too much to be saved, and we just blame it on our television generation. And you know, in the school, Pastor Wood and I have talked about it often. We say, well, a lot of these students come from homes that aren't Christian, and they don't have Christian environment home, and what can we expect? And we just say to ourselves, let's not blame on our own lack of spiritual power the home. You can do it. But I tell you, God works in moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. Now, how does Philemon come at the last of Paul's letters? As the climax, the results. The greatest gulf of Roman society was spanned by the gospel message. As it was lived out in the life of the messenger, and it was preached by his lips, the greatest gulf of Roman society was spanned. Let me give you just this little diagram. The greatest gulf of Roman society in New Testament times was the gulf between masters and slaves, between free men and slaves. So I just like to have it this way in the form of a great gulf. And on one hand you have the masters, and on the other hand you have the slaves. Do you realize that according to Roman law, the slave did not have as much right as an animal did? A man could be confronted by the law if he mistreated an animal, but he could not be so if he mistreated a slave. The slaves were just absolute property. They were absolute property. And that's the great gulf of Roman society. And but look, I just draw the cross over that gulf. The cross spans that gulf between masters and slaves. And here you have the Apostle Paul. And you know, he says to Philemon, if he has wronged you or owes you anything. See, evidently he ran away from his master, and he stole from him before he ran away. He was not only a slave, but he was a dishonest slave. He stole from his master. If he hath wronged thee or owed thee, I'll put that to my account. Well, you see, Paul is a great object lesson of how the gospel of Christ bridges the gulfs of society. Here's this high-bound Jew who hated Christ, hated the Gentiles, and he becomes the great apostle to the Gentiles. And then he's writing to Philemon. Brother Preacher, do you pray a lot about your own relation to the race question today? Or it's a many-sided thing. And I doubt if any preacher would handle it in exactly the same way as another, except that many preachers handle it in the sense that they don't handle it. It just, someone was telling me about a church, one of the members of this class. The lady, she was in a church, and some lady, I better call her a woman. I won't call her a lady. A woman found that there was a black lady with her little grandchildren seated back of her, and she stood right up in church, looked right at her and said, no blacks are admitted in this church. Folks, that is terrible. On the other hand, how are you going to handle it? Well, you ask God to handle it, but handle it, brethren. Handle it. Is the book of Philemon a part of your life? Somebody said, oh, I love that beautiful story. Do you? Are you really practicing it? Oh, how we need it. And not only in the South, but in the North. Up north for years, blacks have been admitted to places, but they've been despised pretty much. And I tell you folks, one of the things I love about this class, I just love to have our dear black friends come. I'd rather not call you. See, the black friends, you're my friends. Not black friends, you're my friends. But in talking about something like this, I have to use the word to let folks know what I'm talking about. Racial prejudice has always been one of the great hindrances to the worldwide spread of the gospel in this land and all over the world. All right, let's take our break now. I have on the board a diagram to fill out on page 4. We left that out in the last period because I didn't want to end the period with this of a rather technical nature. The providential arrangement of the big divisions of the New Testament in our English Bibles. Now, watch, both Testaments are built around this same basic principle. First, you have the Pentateuch in the Old Testament. The Pentateuch gives the truth in seed form. And then the Pentateuch corresponds with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the New Testament. And they introduce us to that truth in fully developed form. Then you have the 12 historical books of the Old Testament. Joshua through Esther, the 12 historical books. Now they give this truth in seed form, and then the book of Acts in the New Testament corresponds to the 12 historical books. Then you have the 5 poetical books: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. And these poetical books correspond to the 21 letters of the New Testament. Then you have your prophetical writings, your major prophets and your minor prophets. And they correspond especially with the book of Revelation in the New Testament. Now let me show you how I like to fill this out. The Pentateuch gives the foundations of redemption. And anybody who's weak on the first 5 books of the Bible is weak on the Bible. You say, no, I pick it all up in the New Testament. No, God gives me something in the Pentateuch He doesn't give me elsewhere. It's the same basic message, but the Pentateuch gives me something about that message that I don't get elsewhere. Can't pick it up elsewhere. The foundations in seed form, and then the Gospels give us the foundations of redemption in fully revealed form. Then the 12 historical books I like to call the experience of redemption. And they give the experience of redemption both positively and negatively. Positively, how does it work out in your life when you really follow the Lord? And then negatively, how does it work out when you don't follow the Lord? And of course, there's a great national emphasis on this. The Old Testament has more of a national emphasis than the New Testament does. That's one reason. A person asked me one time, if we have the New Testament, why do we need the Old? There are different answers. But one answer is the Old Testament has a lot more about the national emphasis on things than the New Testament does. That's experience. And then you come to the book of Acts, and some call that the proclamation of redemption. That's one way to look at it. I like to call it the experience and the proclamation of redemption. What's the main thing God has for me in Acts? To experience the message and then to proclaim it. But often we just say, now I'm called to proclaim it. And I preach my way through the book of Acts, and I just go at it this way, hook, line, and sinker. I'm all for proclaiming it. What about experiencing it? See, that's the great emphasis. And that's one reason the Bible school movement, the Bible college movement originated, is because the seminaries in general did not lay enough stress on the experience of redemption. And I think the same weakness is true today, but it's also true in the Bible Institute movement and in the Bible college movement. More and more it's sweeping that way. The experience of redemption. Then the poetical books are the explanation of redemption. And that's one reason why I've asked you to read regularly from Psalms day by day. Let me ask for hands again. How many of you still make it your general rule to read at least some from Psalms day by day? Let me see your hands. Good. In addition to your reading from other parts of the Bible. See, that gets the experience in your heart in a special way and explains it to you. You may say, well, I don't quite understand it. You just keep on praying those prayers. And you keep on going along with the book of Psalms, and more it'll get into your mind. And you will understand it. Because after all, understanding is primarily a matter of the heart. Then your 21 letters of the New Testament give the explanation of redemption in fully revealed form. Then the prophets are the call to redemption. You see, they come at the end of the Old Testament. I told you earlier today that in a special sense, I think the prophets, major and minor prophets, these 17 books, are the index finger of the Old Testament. Here's the message now. Here's the message. What are you going to do about it? Now, you have that all the way through, but it comes to a climax there. Then the book of Revelation, you say, is the great book of prophecy, but it's the great call to redemptive experience. That's what it is. You see, you start off with the letters to the churches in chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Revelation. The call to redemptive experience. And what is the call? The call is to the Lamb on the throne. See, Christ is called the Lamb 28 times in Revelation. More often in Revelation than all the rest of the Bible put together. Christ is called the Lamb. And the Lamb on the throne who completes everything. You say the book of Revelation is a great book of completion. I want things completed. Not primarily. I don't want things completed. I want to obey God's call to the Lamb on the throne. The one who completes everything. There are certain writers that have this true of them in a special way. Of course, one of them is Spurgeon. One reason I love Spurgeon is that I do believe he's the most Christ-centered of all the preachers that I've ever read, of course, outside the Bible. The most Christ-centered of all. And the cause to the Lamb, even he warns us even about the expression, the blood of Christ. He says, you can use that in the right scriptural way, or you can use it in an unscriptural way. Say, I preach the blood. Do you preach the one who sheds his blood? Now, that can be just a different terminology, but it's often deeper than that. So that man's a great preacher of the blood, but do you really get the sense that he lives in the presence of the Lord? The call to the Lamb on the throne, the one who completes everything. I give you that diagram just to show you that just helps me to see the Bible as a whole. There are many different ways people outline it. And if you find anything from my outline that helps you, use it. On the other hand, you students who are taking it for credit, you better use it. Because I'm going to be checking you on that. You know, I appreciate so much Brother Tim Driggers, one of the teachers here in the class, in the school, and he's in our classes, and he drills the kids on these things. And it means so much to me. I can't tell you really how highly I do think of him. And I think highly of all you preachers. You mean an awful lot to me. Come to page 10. We skipped over things where I told you we were going to be skipping. And on page 10, this second principle, I'll give page 9 next time. Study Romans to learn the full meaning of salvation. Notice, please, this opening statement. The student of Scripture will be aided in his understanding of salvation if he studies carefully the usus loquendi of the word salvation throughout the book of Romans and throughout the entire New Testament. That is the way it's used. It's used in speaking. From a careful study of the various contexts, show how the words salvation and redemption are used in the following scriptures. In other words, indicate and explain the aspect of salvation which is emphasized in each of the following groups of scriptures. First, A, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation to every one that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is revealed the righteousness of God from faith unto faith, as it is written, but the righteous shall live by faith. In Romans 1:16, the word salvation is used for the whole salvation process. And we're going to take it apart in the scriptures that follow. For the whole salvation process. Salvation past, salvation present, salvation future. Now we're going to take those apart and see what they mean. But here in Romans 1:16 and 17, that word is used in the all-inclusive sense. Total salvation. That's the word of one of the theologians. I like that word. Total salvation. Lord, ground me in total salvation. And the average person doesn't have the faintest idea of what total salvation really is. And even those who talk about the Romans Road just give you a little part of the Romans Road. But folks, remember, the Romans Road means the whole book of Romans. It's the whole book of Romans. Total salvation. It's sometimes said that the theme of Romans is justification by grace through faith plus nothing. Justification by grace through faith plus nothing. But I think it is more accurate to say the theme of Romans is total salvation. Not just justification, but salvation by grace through faith plus nothing. I know there's some of the old Puritans and all who take justification in a rather all-inclusive sense. But I think it's important to break this down, and my reason is the way the word salvation or redemption is used in the book of Romans. It isn't just used for one aspect of the truth. First of all, it's used for the all-inclusive thing. There's a very familiar story about Bishop Westcott, the great Greek scholar, and I think great preacher. You know, some who fight the Westcott and Hort text of Scripture almost make a villain out of dear old Bishop